Welcome to EuroPCom, a socially distanced welcome, of course.
Yes, indeed. Welcome to EuroPCom. I'm Alix.
And I'm Joke, and we're here to guide you through this interactive session looking at new ways of public communication.
Because, just in case you haven't noticed, the pandemic has turned everything we thought we knew about communication upside down.
And events like EuroPCom are among the casualties of the restrictions now in place. But like so many organizations whose activity is based on face-to-face communication, the European Committee of the Regions has turned the challenge into an opportunity.
And it's an opportunity we want you to accompany us on now, as we consider the dramatic changes forced upon us in the past year.
But first, let's get to know each other. We've told you who we are.
And we want to know a bit more about you, especially where you're from.
Tell us. Just capture the QR code on your screen and respond to the Slido. We'll give you a bit of time to do that.
So if you are joining us just now, you can see a QR code on your screen, which we invite you to scan and answer the question that pops up.
Yes, we want to see who's with us now. Okay, we got someone in Brussels, Berlin. Welcome.
Whoa, somebody from Hungary?
Croatia. Italy and Switzerland. Now, Zoom, Skype, WebEx, Interactio, Jitsi, admit it, you probably haven't heard of most of these platforms 9 months ago.
But now they're part of everyday life, and they're at the heart of a communications revolution that looks set to change the way we interact forever.
Yes, I don't know about you, but since March I've taken part in dozens of video conferences, webinars, and some of us have even been distance dating.
Hybrid events, heard of them? Have you been doing training courses or learning online? This is the new normal. And much as we might want things to get back to normal, we don't know what normal will look like anymore.
Well, normal for EuroPCom now looks like this. Us. Presentation and interaction digitally. And we're starting soon at 10:30 in less than 1 hour.
But for now, we're here on Facebook Live, chatting with some of the speakers, interacting together and sharing perspectives on new trends in public communication.
Now, public communication is a challenge at the best of time. Breaking through with your message to make a lasting impact. Now it's twice as difficult. We're looking with fresh eyes at how to communicate in emergencies.
How to deal with fake news, and there's been a lot of that lately. We're asking ourselves, what is the new normal in our field? And in the post-pandemic world, what will public communication look like?
Well, it's sure to be more participative. And that reminds me, let's do another Slido. And again, you can take your smartphone and scan the QR code on the screen.
So, what is the biggest challenge in working remotely? Did you work remotely, Joke?
Yeah, I've been working at home, sometimes in my pajamas.
Me too, I admit.
I can see people have been working with their cat. I also have a cat, and she sometimes jumps on my lap or on my laptop. It's not always easy.
Wow, a lot of answers popping up. Isolation, that is true.
Yeah, lack of motivation, no private life. Also the kids, of course, don't have any, but I can imagine
Yes.
sometimes they're distracted.
Oh, cooking. Yes, I understand that. Yes, and talking to a screen. Exactly what we are doing right now.
Now, the pandemic has shown us all the importance of clear, credible public communication from government at all levels: local, regional, national, and of course European. Engaging citizens has become more important than ever, at a time when frustration with restrictions imposed on our lives has grown.
The situation right now is bringing seismic changes to how we communicate and how we need to communicate. We've all had to adapt very quickly. Now it's maybe the time to pause and think about what kind of innovative and creative ways of working and communicating we could invent.
Because yes, we can become more innovative and creative when communicating about European projects. And there's a lot to communicate on. We're thinking about two things in particular.
Two of the most prominent initiatives of the European agenda for the years to come, with huge implications for European public communication: the Conference on the Future of Europe and the European Green Deal.
These are the hot topics that we're going to look at during these 2 days of the EuroPCom event. There are challenges and opportunities in communication around those themes, and we have some great live guests to talk about that with us. Let's meet them.
To take us through the digital focus of this EuroPCom, we have Liiljana Simic, a creative advisor, entrepreneur and consultant and trainer in the field of personal and organizational intercultural development.
We have Brikena Xhomaqi, who is co-chair of the European Economic and Social Committee Liaison group.
Also, Joanna Sullivan, a sustainability expert who runs her own consultancy company called Conscience.
And from the European Commission, Anthony Agotha, a senior advisor to the Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans.
We'll be talking about how the communication world is adapting to the new situation, how to communicate Europe on the ground to reinforce policy priorities, how to ensure relevant and effective involvement of citizens, and how communication links to action.
And we'll also talk about the latest digital trends in communication, a topic of great relevance. And I'm sure you'll agree. So let's grab a coffee and kickstart our neurons with our first guests.
And as we're talking communication, the first hot topic we want to discuss is digital.
When you think digital, you probably think Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. But in today's world, digital means democracy. Digital means deciding. Digital means doing. The pandemic has meant we're isolated physically, but connected digitally more than ever. And those connections present both opportunities and challenges for politics. After all, democracy isn't just for elections, it's for making our societies and communities stronger. And we're adapting to new ways and new platforms for making our voices heard. The big question is how our elected representatives can harness this change for the better, working with citizen activists to strengthen democracy and promote participation in public life.
And to explore this more in detail, Liiljana Simic.
Liiljana, give us a specific example of how the digital world has been shaped by organizational development.
So when you think digital, you probably think Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. But do you know what is Octothrop? Do you know what is a hashtag? It is 10 years young, and we started using from 2007 by a certain Chris Mosino. I'm pretty sure that you are using a hashtag. I do. How many hashtags you put when you want really to stress a certain information to the others? Do you have any clue how many per daily hashtags we may use for something that really matters for us?
Again, give us an example, please.
From 2016 to 2018, there was a hashtag Black Lives Matter. Do you have any idea how many per day of this hashtag was used by many of us?
Good idea. Let's do another slide though. Here's the QR code, and you can capture it to give us an answer. How many times a day was this hashtag used? Give us your best guess. So we can see what you voted on, how many times the hashtag has been used. And it seems like a lot of people
30,000 seems to be winning.
Yeah, 30,000.
6% say 3,000 times.
I think we're staying around 50% for 30,000. That seems to be the winner.
And yes, many possibilities, but there is a one answer. And I can only hope that you did not Google while replying. It was very fast. So 20,000 on the daily basis. So it's an incredible number that may reach a larger number of people, and they can really reinforce the social networks doing their impact on the societies.
What are you focusing on in particular at this year's EuroPCom?
Absolutely. This afternoon, we will question ourselves together. Is the future of democracy digital? And we can reinverse the logic and asking, what about the digital future? And what about the possibilities of a digital democracy? We may also question and challenging the concept of representative democracy and participatory democracy, sharing a list of different examples that can help us to understand that complexity, ambiguity, and contradictions, and see what might be the impact that we already feel that the digital life of us is bringing to us, but also to see the future impact.
Is it too early to be talking about digital democracy in our society?
Do you know that on a Twitter, we are daily 145 million of us are using a Twitter? Do you know that on a Facebook, we are almost 4 times bigger in the numbers? And this is obviously our contemporary Agora. This is a new place and a new public area where we share, where we decide, where we assign, and where we vote.
So would you say that politics need to catch up with society?
The question is that democracy, participatory democracy, digital in the future? Well, the future is obviously digital, but to which extent the democracy is going to replace representativeness towards the participation? Do we feel the impact, and can we see the risk?
Well, that's a good point. Tell us more about how you see the risk.
Very compatible subject within the first digital lab of the day 1 will bring us to the digital lab of a day 2. And in a day 2, we are going together on a mostly participatory way to engage with each other and to have the sense of ownership of the experience of the pandemic year that differently we can call infodemic year. How many strange stories we heard, how many plots we realized that are based on mostly disinformation. So what is the narrative, and what might be the patterns of the same narrative nowadays? What the states all over the world are doing, how EU is positioning themselves there, and what the media may change in the coming and the near future. And finally, I would invite each of us to take a co-responsibility in doing something within the disinformations, which are probably all over.
Thanks, Liiljana.
Now, the great advantage of the digital revolution is that it's open to all of us, whoever we are, wherever we are.
conference on the future of Europe. 2 years of driving change, engaging Europeans and building a more active, responsive EU. It's an opportunity for us all to be involved, to be heard, and for the EU to move out of Brussels into our communities, listening and learning, with citizens leading the dialogue. But the EU's not always found it easy to engage citizens, to encourage participation. How can this process be different? How should this ambitious project move forward? And what are the best platforms for making participation as broad as possible?
Brikena, hello to you. The Conference on the Future of Europe presents many challenges for engaging these EU citizens. Do you think the EU is ready?
It is very difficult because we are used more to have this top-down approach when it comes to communication to citizens, but also their involvement. And the European institutions don't always manage to reach those citizens that are more vulnerable and marginalized. For example, people living in rural areas or in small cities, in remote areas in general. So it's very difficult to involve all those citizens. However, historically, this has been done through civil society because most of the civil society organizations are actually, their constituencies are made of citizens that are mostly marginalized because they have better approaches in how to reach them out and how to involve them in the process of EU decision making. But it's still very, very hard because you need a lot of time in order to train them, to build their capacity to understand the EU first, which is the first step for citizens to get into the EU decision making, is to understand how the EU works. And then once they understand how the EU works, to see how to formulate their concerns into policy formulations.
How strong do you think the proposed structure for the conference is to improve the quality of interactions with citizens?
Well, we don't know yet. It's still in the cooking process. At the moment, the process is stuck because of the leadership. The institutions haven't decided who will lead the process. It will be organized around a high-level conference that will involve all the main EU institutions. And then it will have youth agoras, where youth organizations, youth in general, will be involved in the process. And then it will have also citizens agora. However, what we don't know yet, how this will be organized. One scenario would be that the member states will be in charge of organizing the youth agoras and the citizens agoras. Another scenario is that this can be organized by citizens themselves. But if that's the scenario, then there has to be resources in place for the citizens to mobilize and organize those agoras. So it's not known yet how this process will happen. But the idea is really to have for 2 years ongoing dialogues with different citizens at different levels. And that at the end of these dialogues, there are policy recommendations or concerns that are brought up to the attention, and they could be translated into recommendations that will end up in a final report that will be discussed in 2022 with the Czech and the French presidency on how they will actually influence the future of Europe.
With all the challenges that Europe is facing right now, is this the right time to be rethinking Europe?
The timing is very critical because of the pandemic, of course, which makes also the communication with the citizens even harder and decision-making even more difficult. So this is an additional challenge for this conference to achieve its goals, but it's also quite a good moment to getting citizens on board, and quite a good moment to rethink the way we do things at EU level and the way the EU is leading by example and the way that its institutions are functioning. So yeah, it's a key moment to really rethink the future together with the citizens.
What's the risk, do you think, that the conference turns into an exercise of Brussels talking to Brussels?
Well, what we see is that, of course, there are many ways for citizens to get involved, but the ones that get involved are usually the ones that have more chances in general to participate in decision making, either because they have the qualifications, the knowledge, the contacts, the access to these different channels. And so it's always the same people that are able to actually engage with the EU. So there is a gap, of course, that's, as I said before, usually is filled by civil society, but then it depends how the EU structures the social dialogue and how regular and how structured this dialogue is, and how much spaces are there for civil society and this type of citizens to have a say on the EU agenda.
How would you address this gap?
It is difficult because what we do right now, or what the EU institutions are used to do, is to use very mainstreamed approaches, using a terminology that is very difficult to understand for who is outside of the EU Brussels bubble. So already the language is a big barrier because most of the communication happens in English or in a very mainstreamed language, and very technocratic, very bureaucratic language that very often a normal citizen will not understand. And so this is a major barrier to get them involved. For example, I mean, of course, I might be biased here because I come from the education and training sector, and it's not a new competence, so the EU cannot interfere into the education content of the member states. But at the same time, the EU wants to promote EU values across the Union, and it doesn't do it enough through education. It does it only through online channels and, for example, the Europe Direct or the European permanent representations in the countries, or other channels that remain very difficult to access channels because are mostly online communication channels. And yeah, they are not enough catered to the need of the different citizens, which is also to build their capacity to understand. And yeah, this is definitely a big challenge for the Union.
What tools would you say are the best to use for enhancing the EU's engagement with citizens?
Well, there are instruments in place that the citizens could use, but as I said before, they are not informed about those instruments. For example, the European Citizenship Initiative is one of them, where they could gather 1 million signatures in order to have political priority put into the EU agenda. But this, so far in the EU history, we have no 1 or 2, 3 maximum initiatives that have been successful. And this has been because the process, it's very bureaucratic and very difficult, but also very few citizens know about it. But another issue is also that there is generally not enough information about the EU, about the importance of the EU, about the achievements of the EU. And also there is not enough interest also in the EU decision making, because the information at national level is not going through. So very often EU achievements are translated by national achievements, and there is not enough communication about the added value of the Union through the national governments, and that's an additional barrier. But also there is a little trust that even if citizens are involved, that there is a real impact on the policy at the EU level. And this is a big issue because the way these instruments are built, they don't prove an actual impact on the EU agenda. They haven't proved so far that the citizens' concerns are actually having an impact on EU policies.
Do you think the EU's engagement with citizens is sufficiently deep or just superficial?
In the last decade, and especially in the last years, because of the multiple crises that the Union has known, there have been a lot of different movements, and also around the climate issues. There have been a lot of youth organizations, new youth movements, unorganized movements that are building up. But what we have seen as civil society organizations is that when it comes to them having a say on the EU agenda, they have to always rely on existing structures of existing organizations. because they have established a dialogue with the EU institutions, and it's a channel for them that they cannot just avoid. So they have to go through those existing structures. And it depends a bit also on how open the EU institutions are to this new movement. We have seen that the climate one, the institutions have been very open to it. They have heard to the young people. They have met with the young people. Different ministers and different commissioners have met with those representatives of those movements. But in my opinion, they have remained rather marketing and communication exercise than an impactful process.
So I guess it's important not just for the EU to make the effort, but to follow up on it too.
There is supposed to be a structured dialogue, especially in the youth sector, for example, that is more bottom-up. But what we have seen that even in that case, there are organized different conferences, youth conferences, where the young people, for example, bring their concerns to the attention of the EU institutions. And then we haven't seen much done after that. So basically, the means and the mechanism is there, but it's not showing its impact and its results on the actual policies. So I would say that improving those existing mechanisms, like the structured dialogue, for example, in youth, by showing youth that actually all their concerns are taken into consideration and they are applied into the EU policies, that will be an important step for the next conference as well.
What do you see as the biggest challenges that the EU needs to confront? Not just policies, but approaches?
Well, I mean, there is no surprise that the economic crisis due to the current pandemic will be a major issue that all member states are aware of, and they already are taking actions in place to face it. But in our opinion, and in my opinion as a representative of civil society, I think citizens' well-being and mental health will be an additional challenge for member states to face, social cohesion in general, and solidarity in the union to be kept. And of course, in general, all social issues that are related to an economical crisis will be a big challenge. So member states now are acting mostly on the economic side, but very soon they will have to face the social consequences of this crisis.
Thank you, Brikena. Interesting perspectives that will surely be explored in greater detail over these 2 days.
Yes, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Now, let's shift focus towards perhaps the most pressing policy issue we're facing this century: climate change.
Climate change. Opinion polls show it's the most important issue for European citizens. And the EU is responding with the Green Deal, a transformation of our economy from fossil fuels to zero carbon, enhancing our prosperity and improving our quality of life, cleaner air, healthier lives and restored biodiversity. But is this all too ambitious? How can the EU best encourage citizens to support this plan and to lead it? What effect will the pandemic have on climate action? And how can communication help reinforce policy decisions?
We have Joanna and Anthony with us. Anthony first. Can you summarize for us how the EU will be approaching the climate crisis in the coming years?
Well, we have a roadmap, which is called the European Green Deal, whereas we deal with the built environment, which is a huge amount of emissions and energy consumption, where we can lower costs for consumers and we can lower emissions at the same time, and we can create local jobs that are not outsourced. But it's also about new energy sources like renewable energy, solar panels, offshore wind, hydrogen, which is going to be a new technology. But we also deal with agriculture, lower the amount of pesticides, have smarter ways of agriculture, creating better food and less emissions. And we deal, of course, with biodiversity. We need to protect our nature, not because of nature itself, but because it helps us, whether it's about pollinators or whether about trees having in the city or in the forests.
Over to you, Joanna. When it comes to climate change, what's more important, policies or communication?
Yeah, the Green Deal is ambitious in terms of policy, in terms of strategy. I guess the question is, does it go far enough in achieving the systemic change that we need, that will drive social justice and that will drive climate action? The question is it going to be big enough and fast enough to make the big difference? However, and I think this is the point, really, is the juxtaposition between the Commission pronouncing on the Green Deal that they want people, businesses, employees, citizens, parents, teachers, educators, others to engage in the Green Deal, to take actions on an individual level, yet the policy needs to keep up with that. So without serious action on the policy level, it will be hard for the European Commission to communicate effectively on the Green Deal and to be taken seriously.
Anthony, we know the Commission has invested huge political capital in the Green Deal. It's the centerpiece of the Commission's work program, but can we afford it in the wake of the pandemic?
Well, people talk a lot about all the costs to make a green transition, but the costs of non-action we don't always discuss. But the costs of non-action in terms of droughts, in terms of wildfires, desertification, conflict over water, loss of pollinators, which is a huge problem, crop failures, freak storms, and we see this happening before our eyes. These costs are a lot higher than the investments needed for a green transition. And the longer we wait, the more expensive it becomes. Before COVID, I traveled back and forth to Slovenia almost every summer with my family, my wife and my kids, because I was posted there at the Dutch embassy early on. And I remarked that after every trip back and forth, my windshield in my car was full of dead bugs and I had to clean it out. But in the second decade of this century, I noticed after a trip of almost 1,200, 1,300 kilometers, there was hardly a bug to be seen. And I already wondered, this is not a good sign.
Joanna, what are you looking for from the debates and discussions this week?
We need real insights from all stakeholders thrown into the mix without any fear, and we need a really strong drive for collaborative models which are agile, dynamic, and that are interfaced with the policy process. So all of those voices can create better quality policy. And as much as the Green Deal is ambitious in terms of strategy and approach, we have to make sure that there's an alignment between the aspirations, which are communicated and shared by citizens and businesses, and the actual policies which are implemented.
Anthony, there are questions we could ask you, but I know you want to ask a question to our viewers.
Well, the question I'd like to put to the public is whether you know how many people each year in Europe die prematurely because of air pollution.
Check out the Slido here and give it your best shot. How many people die every year prematurely in Europe due to air pollution?
C'est normal, c'est normal. C'est normal.
Well, I hope it's not a big number, but I fear it is. As an asthmatic person, I know it's bad.
Okay, I see a lot of answers popping up. It's just too quick. I can't really see immediately what the right answer is, but the right answer is 400,000 people each year in Europe die prematurely of air pollution. And I'm not talking about all the little kids and babies who suffer from asthma because of air pollution and fine particles, but it's a big issue. And the thing is, the great thing about it is you can actually tackle this very easily. You can tackle this by electrifying, for instance, your transport, your public transport with electric buses, electric trams and trains. The more electric vehicles we get into the cities, immediately air pollution will be a lot less. We can tackle it with the way we deal with agriculture. We could tackle it with more insulation in our homes and more solar panels. So the whole energy consumption in our houses, and that's what our renovation wave is about. So the good news is we can tackle it. The bad news is we have to start realizing that it's not normal that so many people suffer from this.
Joanna, we've heard from our other guests about citizen assemblies. Can this idea be developed in the climate policy space?
I think it needs to be binding. At least it needs to be taken seriously. It cannot be seen as a kind of talking shop on the side, away from policy. It needs to be at the center of power. So there's the possibility of real change being affected. And you know, in some cities, for example, Amsterdam, are really taking this quite seriously in terms of integrating public voice with actual policy change, and also supporting people to be activists in their businesses and in the street to be able to push forward more powerful, more ambitious policies, which are really transformative. For example, getting rid of gas in the whole of the city as a supply, as an energy supply. We need some really bold decision makers, frankly. I think that is a big part of the puzzle. We need way more bold decision makers who dare to be ambitious and do things differently. We need way more progressive business leaders, CEOs, but that's coming because companies see that they can't recruit people if they don't have a strong sustainability and climate-facing agenda, because people just don't want to work in those kind of companies anymore. Young people.
Let's look for a moment at what European citizens think about climate change. And I want to ask you to do another Slido.
And once again, scan the QR code on your screen. So, what's the percentage of people in Europe have taken at least one action in their lives in response to climate change?
Wow, it looks like many people did.
Have you?
Of course I have, Joke.
Yeah, I'm quite of a green girl.
Yeah, me too. I came by bicycle today.
Okay, I didn't. That's one of my guilty pleasures. I like being in a car, but I compensate it with using less water, less garbage. I'm a vegetarian.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Yeah. So I'm just watching at people saying. And the answer is 93% of us have taken at least one action in their lives in response to climate change.
And if you're in that small group of 7%, well, you need to catch up.
Joanna, does that reflect what you're hearing on the ground?
There's been a massive change in terms of public perception. There is the political will to act in most countries now. The change in society has been quite dramatic, the speed of change. And of course, now we see that with COVID, people know that governments can take actions like that when they need to. For example, some countries wanted to promote their gas industry. That just doesn't fit with the Green Deal. And the problem is, as much as the Green Deal is ambitious and it's strong, people will know where the contradictions are because they will be in the media. People are more aware and more informed. So now there's no excuse. And I feel like on climate change, it's about It's not just about limiting what people do, it's about enabling people to work in green business, to create jobs which are going to support retrofits in buildings and other things. So this is an opportunity. It's not a negative, it's a massively positive story.
Anthony, let me ask you, how important is EU communication to address climate change denial?
You can run from science, but you can't hide from reality. It's a myth and it's a lie if anyone believes that by simply doing everything we continue to do, everything will stay the same, that tomorrow will be the same as yesterday. The world is changing before our eyes and everywhere. And as my boss, Frans Timmermans, always says, we're in the fourth industrial revolution. This has to do with technology, it has to do with climate change, with demography, you name it. So the world is changing, but the question is, are we going to help shape this world so that it can sustain in the future 10 billion people, because we don't have extra planets, or are we going to be passive onlookers and perhaps victims of what's going on? This is, I think, the fundamental question.
Joanna, on this idea of communicating climate change, how important is it that the communicators on climate change are using the same words and language?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Exactly. So while and speak the same language, because up until now we've been like this business language, kind of long words, it's policy language, it's quite opaque, and there's people's language, which is much more clear and direct and active and simple. And we need to kind of blend those together so everybody's speaking the same language, everybody has a common understanding of exactly what we're talking about. Like all good communication, you have to start off with a common understanding of what you're talking about. The kind of lexicon, the climate lexicon, which is now, for example, changed from climate change to climate emergency, people need to be speaking the same language, using the words which they all understand exactly what they all mean. That's the essence of effective climate communication, is selecting and choosing and working on the right words and the right language, the right concepts, so everybody has a common basis of understanding. Because if there's no common basis of understanding, what you end up with is some kind of greenwash.
And do you think it's possible to unite all parts of this debate to develop a common vision?
People all understand there are big problems. Many people more now understanding the intersectionality, the kind of the effects, the impacts between, for example, financial inequality and climate disempowerment. So, I mean, we can't all be civil society activists or actors unless we have the space and the voice to be able to participate. So what's really fascinating is bringing those people together. There is a shared vision. There is a shared understanding of urgency and the need. And once people start talking, asking each other questions, they say, aha, I get you now, we can work together. And that's when we get people starting to knock down the walls and build bridges between very diverse interests. Because if everybody has the same vision of this green future, of a green deal, of a better world, which is all a positive story about well-being, then everybody wants to work towards it. And if we assume everybody does, then most people do. And then we just move faster forward. But bringing together different stakeholders, diverse interests, for me is like essential to having this breakthrough.
Thanks, Joanna, and thanks, Anthony.
So, that wraps up our introduction to EuroPCom. We wish you a productive 2 days of engagement on these vital questions, and thank you for joining us.
One more thing. Tomorrow at 1:30 in the afternoon, Central European Time, we'll be back with the closing show to wrap up this event and sip a few virtual cocktails with you. Or mocktails if you have to go back to work after.
And we want you to contribute to the discussion tomorrow afternoon too. See the Slido below on your screen. Capture it now because it will give you the chance to ask a question to the experts we'll have on tomorrow's show.
They'll be waiting for your questions and we'll be answering a bunch of them to close out this year's EuroPCom.
So until tomorrow, enjoy your communication.